57 battles, 0 wounds, 1 spear. Imagine a warrior so skilled, so impossibly lucky, that he fought in dozens of the bloodiest battles in Japanese history and never received a single significant injury. A man whose spear was so sharp that a dragonfly landing on its blade would be sliced in half without the spear even moving. His name was Honda Tadakatsu, and he wielded the Tonbokiri, one of the 3 great spears of Japan. While everyone thinks of the katana as the samurai's soul, the truth is far more deadly. The Yari, the Japanese spear, was the real king of the battlefield. This weapon was so dominant that even the legendary Miyamoto Musashi had to bow before a master spearman's skill. While Ghost of Yotei lets you feel the reach and power of the spear, the real history is even more brutal. Today, we're diving deep into the weapon that dominated samurai warfare and the warriors who made it legendary. But before we dive deep into the blood and steel of Japan's spear warfare, do me a favor, hit that like button and share this video so you don't miss content like this. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe if you're fascinated by the real weapons of the samurai era. Check out our previous videos where we explored dual katana, yumi, kusarigama, and odachi, all weapons you'll find in Ghost of Yotei. Now, let's step onto the battlefield where the Yari reigned supreme. Honda Tadakatsu was born in 1548 in Mikawa province and began serving Tokugawa Ieyasu from childhood. But this wasn't just any samurai. This was a man destined to become a living legend, a warrior so skilled that his enemies believed he was protected by the gods themselves. At just 14 years old in 1561, Tadakatsu recorded his first kill in battle. When his uncle offered him the head of an enemy he had killed, young Tadakatsu refused, stating he didn't want to rely on others to achieve military merit. He then charged into enemy ranks alone and took his own trophy. This wasn't bravado, it was a declaration. Tadakatsu would earn his glory himself, and he would do it with the spear. Every legendary warrior needs a legendary weapon. For Honda Tadakatsu, that weapon was the Tonbokiri, one of the 3 great spears of Japan. The Tonbokiri was forged by Fujiwara Masazane of the Muramasa school, featuring a blade approximately 41 centimeters in length, with the full spear extending to about 4 meters, over 13 feet long. But here's where the legend gets incredible. The name Tonbokiri literally means dragonfly slayer. The legend says the blade was so impossibly sharp that a dragonfly landing on its tip would be divided in 2, even without the spear moving at all. Think about that. The blade's edge was so perfectly honed that the weight of an insect pressing against it was enough to cut through its body. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a masterpiece of Japanese smithing. The blade is also engraved with Sanskrit symbols representing Jizo Bodhisattva, the guardian of children and travelers, symbols of divine protection, light in the clouds. Tadakatsu carried both a physical and spiritual weapon into battle. Here's where Honda Tadakatsu's story becomes almost unbelievable. Tadakatsu participated in over 50 battles during his lifetime, including crucial engagements at Onagawa in 1570, Mikitagahara in 1572, Nagashino in 1575, and Komaki Nagakute in 1584. These weren't small skirmishes. These were massive, brutal battles involving thousands of soldiers, volleys of arrows, waves of cavalry, and walls of spears. The kind of chaos where survival was a miracle and walking away unscathed was impossible. Except for Honda Tadakatsu. Honda Tadakatsu fought in 57 battles throughout his life and never once suffered a single significant wound. Not a scratch, not a cut, not a broken bone. He earned the title, the warrior who surpassed death itself. How is that even possible? Skill, yes. Luck, maybe. But also the Yari? The reach of his spear meant he could strike enemies before they could touch him. The length of the Tonbokiri gave him a killing zone that few could penetrate. Tadakatsu's finest moment came at the Battle of Komaki and Nagakute in 1584. Tadakatsu audaciously rode out alone to challenge Toyotomi Hideyoshi's much larger force. He sat on his horse, Tonbokiri in hand, facing down thousands of enemy soldiers. This wasn't suicide. It was strategy. It was intimidation. It was a message. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, impressed by this brazen show of courage, ordered his men to spare Tadakatsu and let him return to his lines. Even Hideyoshi, one of Japan's greatest military minds, recognized that killing this man would accomplish nothing. Tadakatsu had already won the psychological battle. Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King himself, praised Tadakatsu as Japan's #1 warrior after witnessing his courage in battle. Toyotomi Hideyoshi considered Tadakatsu and Tachibana Muneshige to be the best samurai of the East and West, respectively. Even his enemies respected him. The rival warlord Takeda Shingen said, "Ieyasu has only two things that exceed his own worth: his unique helmet and Honda Tadakatsu." After decades of war, Honda Tadakatsu finally died peacefully in his sleep in December 1610 at the age of 62. The man who fought 57 battles didn't fall to a sword, a spear, or an arrow. He died of old age, in his bed, surrounded by the respect of an entire nation. The Tonbokiri, his legendary spear, became a treasured relic, a symbol of invincibility and the deadly artistry of the Yari. By the early 1600s, the age of the warring states was ending. Tokugawa Ieyasu had consolidated power, and the dreams of rival clans were crumbling. But there was one man who refused to surrender, one warrior who would make the Tokugawa remember his name forever. Sanada Nobushige, better known as Sanada Yukimura, was called a hero who may appear once in 100 years, Crimson Demon of War, and the last Sengoku hero. The veteran General Shimazu Tadatsune called him the #1 warrior in Japan. Sanada Yukimura was known for wielding a red Jumonji Yari, a cross-shaped spear during the Siege of Osaka in both the winter and summer campaigns of 1614 and 1615. The Jumonji Yari wasn't just functional, it was a symbol of status. These cross-shaped spears were more expensive to produce than regular Yari and were primarily used by generals. The design featured side blades that could hook and trap enemy weapons, making it devastatingly effective in close combat. Yukimura's spear was painted red, matching his armor, his banners, and his legend. On the battlefield, the Crimson Demon was impossible to miss. In late 1614, Tokugawa Ieyasu marched on Osaka Castle with a massive army. Yukimura, commanding 7,000 men, built a small fortress called Sanada Maru on the southwest corner of the castle. From this position, he defeated Tokugawa forces numbering approximately 30,000 men, using groups of 6,000 arquebusiers to rain death on the attackers. The Sanada Maru consisted of earthworks and stockades behind a dry moat and palisade. Sanada had also constructed a massive moat linking the Ikutama Canal and Nakoma Stream, an excavation 240 feet wide and 36 feet deep. The Tokugawa forces charged again and again. Each time, they were slaughtered. Yukimura's defense was so effective that Ieyasu was forced to negotiate a temporary truce. But this was just the beginning. The peace didn't last. By June 1615, Ieyasu had returned, and this time, he wasn't taking chances. On June 3, 1615, at the Battle of Tennoji, Yukimura found himself facing a massive Tokugawa force of nearly 150,000 soldiers. The Toyotomi forces, including Yukimura's men, numbered only about 54,000 to 60,000 troops. The odds were impossible. The battle was lost before it began. But Sanada Yukimura didn't fight for victory. He fought for honor, for legend, for one final chance to strike at the man who had destroyed everything he believed in. Sanada Yukimura charged toward Tokugawa Ieyasu's camp on horseback. wielding his red Jumonji Yari in a desperate attempt to kill Ieyasu himself and turn the tide of battle. Picture the scene. Thousands of soldiers locked in brutal combat, gunfire and screams filling the air. And through it all, a lone warrior in crimson armor, spear raised high, charging straight for the enemy commander. Yukimura and his elite guard smashed through the Tokugawa lines. They cut down samurai after samurai, pushing deeper and deeper toward Ieyasu's position. For a moment, it seemed possible. For a moment, the Crimson Demon might actually reach the shogun. But numbers tell. Wave after wave of Tokugawa soldiers surrounded Yukimura. His men fell one by one. His charge slowed. Exhausted from the relentless fighting, Sanada Yukimura was found sitting on a stool after the battle. He was identified by enemy soldiers and was swiftly cut down, but not before showing unparalleled skill and bravery. His defeat came only when he was completely incapacitated from exhaustion. He didn't die begging, he didn't die running. He died as he lived, defiant, legendary, and with his red spear still in his grip. The Siege of Osaka was over. The Toyotomi clan was destroyed. But Sanada Yukimura's name lived on, whispered in stories, celebrated in plays, and remembered as the last true hero of the Sengoku period. His red Jumonji Yari became a symbol, a reminder that even in defeat, a warrior with courage and a spear could shake the foundations of an empire. The Yari didn't appear out of nowhere. Like many Japanese weapons, it evolved from Chinese designs brought to Japan through trade and cultural exchange. The forerunner of the Yari is thought to be a Hoko Yari, derived from a Chinese spear. These Hoko Yari are believed to date back to the Nara period, from 710 to 794 AD. The term Yari itself appeared for the first time in written sources in 1334. But this type of spear did not become popular or widespread until the late 15th century. For centuries, the primary weapons of the samurai were the bow and the sword. Warfare was ritualized, often fought on horseback with arrows flying and single combat determining the outcome. The spear was just another tool, not yet the dominant force it would become. But everything changed when the Mongols arrived. In the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire, having conquered China, Korea, and much of Asia, set its sights on Japan. The attempted Mongol invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 changed Japanese weaponry and warfare forever. The Mongols employed Chinese and Korean footmen wielding long pikes, and they fought in tight formations using large coordinated units to stave off cavalry charges. The Japanese samurai were unprepared for this. While Kamakura-era samurai hoped to engage in traditional one-on-one horseback combat, the UN soldiers acted in groups. As samurai approached to make individual challenges, they were immediately surrounded and shot down with arrows and bombarded with explosives. It was a slaughter, not because the Japanese were weak, but because their tactics were outdated. After the Mongol invasions, the spear started becoming more popular in Japan. The Mongolian army attacked in larger, more coordinated units, and swords were ineffective and heavy for prolonged group combat. The Mongols wielded spears and short bows, confounding the Japanese with their superior weaponry and unfamiliar tactics. The lesson was clear: adapt or die. The Japanese began training with longer spears, forming disciplined infantry units and abandoning the romanticized ideals of single combat in favor of brutal, effective mass warfare. By the late 15th and 16th centuries, the Sengoku period, the Yari had become the primary weapon of Japanese armies. Around the latter half of the 16th century, Ashigaru, common foot soldiers, holding pikes called nagae Yari, with lengths of 4.5 to 6.5 meters or 15 to 21 feet, became the main forces in armies. They formed lines combined with soldiers bearing firearms and shorter spears. Pikemen formed 2- or 3-row lines, and were trained to move their pikes in unison under command. Imagine the battlefield. Thousands of Ashigaru standing shoulder to shoulder, their massive spears forming an impenetrable wall of steel. Cavalry couldn't charge. Swordsmen couldn't close the distance. Even samurai generals, once reliant on their katana, now carried yari into battle. The yari eventually became more popular than the yumi, the bow, as a weapon for the samurai, and foot troops used them extensively as well. When many foot soldiers each held a spear, they created a formation called yaributsuma, or the spear hedge. This formation was mainly used against cavalry, as horses are naturally afraid of sharp objects and would refuse to charge into a wall of spear points. This wasn't just defensive, it was psychological warfare. A cavalry charge was one of the most terrifying sights on a medieval battlefield. But against a disciplined yari formation, even the bravest horse would balk. Before the yari's dominance, many samurai preferred the naginata, a curved polearm with a sword-like blade. But the realities of the Sengoku period forced a change. Samurai were compelled to switch their favorite naginata for the yari not by choice, but due to the demands of large-scale group warfare during the Sengoku period. They began using yari out of necessity. The naginata was a beautiful weapon, perfect for sweeping cuts and individual combat. But in tight formations where thousands of soldiers stood packed together, a straight thrusting spear was far more practical. You didn't need fancy techniques. You needed reach, power, and the ability to fight in unison with your comrades. The advantage of the yari is its wide reach. This simple truth defined Japanese warfare for over a century. A katana blade is roughly 60 to 80 centimeters long, about 2 to 3 feet. You need to be within arm's reach to kill someone with a sword. A yari could be 4 to 6 meters long, over 20 feet. You could kill someone from across a small room. On a chaotic battlefield with thousands of combatants, reach meant survival. Reach meant control. Reach meant victory. By the early 1600s, Tokugawa Ieyasu had unified Japan. The Sengoku period ended, and the Edo period began, an era of peace that would last over 250 years. With the coming of the Edo period, the yari had fallen into disuse. The peaceful era reduced the need for mass warfare, and military attention shifted back to close combat and personal skill. Swords regained their importance as status symbols and dueling weapons, while polearms and archery lost their practical battlefield value. During the peaceful Edo era, yari were still produced, sometimes even by highly skilled swordsmiths. But they existed primarily as ceremonial weapons and as tools for samurai police, rather than as instruments of war. The yari became a relic, a symbol of a bygone age of war. It hung on the walls of samurai homes, a reminder of ancestors who had fought in the great battles of unification. But it was no longer the weapon that decided the fate of nations. From the Edo period onward, the naginata gradually became known as a weapon primarily used by women. Samurai daughters and wives were trained in naginata techniques to defend their homes, while men focused on swordsmanship and archery as refined arts rather than battlefield necessities. The yari didn't disappear entirely. It remained in martial arts schools and in the hands of guards and police. But its age of dominance was over. The yari was characterized by a straight blade mounted at the end of a wooden shaft. The blade could measure anywhere from several centimeters long to 3 feet or more, depending on the intended use. But not all yari were created equal. Different warriors used different types, and each design had a specific purpose. The most common blade design was a straight, flat head that resembled a straight-bladed double-edged dagger. This type of blade could cut as well as stab and was sharpened to a razor edge. The su-yari was the workhorse of Japanese armies. Simple, effective, and easy to manufacture in large quantities. Ashigaru foot soldiers carried these into battle by the thousands, forming the spear walls that defined Sengoku warfare. The Sengoku Yari had a point that resembled a narrow spike with a triangular cross-section. Unlike other Yari, it had no cutting edge, only a sharp, reinforced point designed specifically for penetrating armor, even metal plate armor. This was the anti-samurai weapon. When facing an opponent in full armor, slashing and cutting were useless. But a triangular spike, driven with the full force of a spear thrust, could punch through lacquered plates and chainmail, finding the gaps and weak points in even the best protection. This was the weapon of legends, the spear carried by generals and elite warriors. The Jumonji Yari featured sickle-like blades arranged in a cross shape. These spears were significantly more expensive to produce than regular Yari and were primarily used by generals and high-ranking samurai. According to legend, the design was inspired by Hosoin Ine, who saw the reflection of the crescent moon on Sarasawa Pond one evening. He imagined a spear with a cross-shaped spearhead that could hook, trap, and disarm opponents far more effectively than a straight blade. The side blades could catch an enemy's weapon, twist it out of their hands, or pull them off balance. In the hands of a master like Sanada Yukimura, the Jumonji Yari was nearly unstoppable. Not everyone used the same length spear. Your status and role in battle determined the size of your Yari. Samurai usually used Yari measuring 1 to 3 meters on average, roughly 3.3 to 9.9 feet long. These were manageable on horseback and allowed for greater mobility in individual combat. A samurai with a shorter Yari could maneuver more easily, dismount and fight on foot, and still maintain the reach advantage over a swordsman. Ashigaru foot soldiers usually used Yari measuring anywhere from 4 to 6 meters, 13 to 20 feet long. These massive pikes weren't meant for duels or fancy techniques. They were meant for one thing: forming an impenetrable wall of death. When thousands of Ashigaru locked their spears together in formation, cavalry couldn't charge, infantry couldn't advance, and even samurai generals had to think twice before attacking. Behind every legendary weapon is a legendary smith. Fujiwara Masazane was a disciple of the famed and controversial swordsmith Muramasa. Masazane is the smith who forged the Tonbokiri, one of the 3 great spears of Japan and the weapon wielded by Honda Tadakatsu. Masazane's skill was unmatched. The Tonbokiri's blade was balanced, impossibly sharp, never dulling with the divine protection engraved in Sanskrit along its length. The Kanabo Masazane smiths, part of the Masazane lineage, gained a reputation as master Yari makers and had a contract with the Hozo Temple to supply them with spears. The Hozo Temple was famous for its Hozoin Ryu martial arts school, which specialized in spearmanship. This connection between the temple and the smiths created a cycle of excellence, master smiths creating perfect weapons for master warriors, who in turn tested and refined those weapons through decades of training and combat. The result was a martial tradition that lasted centuries and influenced spear combat across Japan. Let's address one of the biggest misconceptions about the Yari in popular culture. The myth. Spears were peasant weapons. Real samurai used katanas. This myth has been perpetuated by movies, anime, and video games for decades. The image of the noble samurai drawing his katana in a dramatic duel is iconic, but it's also misleading. The reality? Samurai carried spears into battle. Not only Ashigaru foot soldiers, but also samurai fought on the battlefield with Yari as one of their main weapons. The 3 great spears of Japan, including the Tonbokiri, were wielded by legendary generals and became treasured heirlooms passed down through noble families. Warriors that we discussed today, Honda Tadakatsu and Sanada Yukimura. These weren't commoners. These were elite warriors, generals, and martial artists who chose the Yari because it was the most effective weapon on the battlefield. Then, why the myth persists? The katana became romanticized during the peaceful Edo period, when dueling and personal combat were more common than mass warfare. The sword became a symbol of the samurai's soul, a mark of status and honor. But during the actual age of war, the Sengoku period, the Yari was king. The Yari was actually far more common and widely used than the katana in many battle situations. The katana was a sidearm, a backup weapon for when your spear broke or when you found yourself in close quarters. The Yari was what you wanted when facing down an army. Reach wins fights. Distance saves lives. And when thousands of soldiers are clashing in the chaos of war, the weapon that lets you kill from 15 feet away is the weapon you want in your hands. The katana was beautiful, iconic, and important for duels and personal honor. But the Yari won wars. The Yari wasn't just a weapon. It was the instrument that shaped Japanese history. From the Mongol invasions that forced Japan to adapt or be conquered, to the Sengoku battlefields where spear formations decided the fate of clans, to the legendary warriors like Honda Tadakatsu who became immortal through their mastery of the spear, the Yari carved its legacy in blood and steel. We witnessed Honda Tadakatsu's impossible 57 battle survival streak with the Tonbokiri, a spear so sharp that a dragonfly would split in half just by landing on it. We saw Sanada Yukimura's final crimson charge at Osaka, defying an empire with nothing but courage and a cross-shaped spear. The katana may be the soul of the samurai, but the Yari was the weapon that won wars, protected nations, and created legends that still echo today. Ghost of Yotei lets you experience the reach and power of these weapons. But now you know the real history. The warriors, the battles, the evolution of warfare itself that the Yari carved into Japanese culture. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the bloody reality of samurai weapons, hit that subscribe button. We've got more weapon explorations coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss them. Drop a comment below. Which legendary Yari user do you think was the most badass? Honda Tadakatsu's immortal record or Sanada Yukimura's final charge against impossible odds? Thanks for watching, and remember, in the age of the samurai, reach was everything, and the Yari had the longest reach of all.